Hello, guys. I hope you guys are all having a really good day and I hope you're all doing really well. I am calling this video Loving the Narcissist and Other Torture Traps. And the reason I'm making this video is because I've seen more and more people in what I've come to call a trap or a trap of Satan, where it's these weird, stressful traps that many times there is no quick, easy, cliche little sayings and easy way outs of the traps, but it's these weird traps and binds. It reminds me of some of my earlier videos I made about the double bind and the narcissist liking to take advantage of your double bind and really any vulnerability they can find you in. But what's really hard, we are in very evil times where there's many different layers and levels of evil that have been put into our lives. That's not what I focus on. Day in and day out, I focus on the Lord and the good things, and I find myself often very grateful seeing the beauty in nature. However, when something ugly does come along, I identify it. I put it in its place. It helps me know how better to see it or handle it or deal with it and what to even do about it. And this really helps me, overcome it, look past it, know that it will just be temporary. Things like knowing how to give it to God, knowing why is a huge help. And hopefully can help other people. You know, the more you know about something, the more you can help others. And so I do recognize the times we're in and the many different layers and levels of the evil that's been introduced into our world so that you kind of know that you're not making it up. Things like that. Things like, you're not making it up. Here we go again. This is what this is. People can't gaslight you into thinking, well, you're just exaggerating and something's wrong with you, that there's nothing wrong in the picture. Those kind of things can really mess with your head if you don't have really good, clear definitions and understanding of things like, this is a very evil time. I'm being messed with just as badly. If you go back 100 years ago and you find people that were, beaten and left for dead in a ditch, well, that's kind of what I've been through. You just can't see it on the outside. That you're not making it up, you're not exaggerating, you do deserve the self-love, you do deserve the care, you are not exaggerating the situation at all. It's kind of like, in a somewhat related idea that I had, things used to be like more simple and straightforward in some ways. There were always, twisted evil things, but for example, the problem that I share a lot on this channel of the people who follow with no conscience about it and they don't think there's anything wrong, and sometimes, many times, it stems from a childhood abuse situation where they needed to escape from an early age and it became a habit, an addiction, or even a mindset of living in a vain imagination. So back in the day, the people who lived like after a vain imagination and for the self, and there was more teaching about it too, and the teaching was more acceptable because you didn't have people at schoolhouses and universities saying, you're not the authority, you can't say this from the pulpit, that's not the truth. The truth is in science, and you only have to come to science. But when they came to science, they didn't really get truth about these things either. So back in the day, there was more. Years ago, there was more information and truth about what it meant to be selfish and idolatrous, making yourself an idol, making your pleasures an idol. And it was more discouragement away from that on so many levels. This is not the video, I guess, to get into that. But I believe it was different in that you could just imagine like an older time where people have always had the issue and the problem with vain imaginations, but this gets into the narcissist explosion of the end times, the prophecy that in these last days men shall be lovers of themselves. That if you're going to have a person who is into vain imaginations and selfish, prideful, puffed up, at the point where they're an idolater and they're drunk with pride, they're drunk with ego, they're drunk with vain imaginations, they are a drunken drunkard who is, and if you guys have been abused by a narcissist, you can understand when I use the word drunken drunkard, it really describes a lot of their behavior as not being realistic and just being so strange and out there. They're drunk on power trips, on paranoias because of the way they have skewed their reality for so long. They're drunk on pleasures, and there has been no reign of that, as in stopping it, curbing it. There has been no curbing of that for such a long time that where I'm going with this description is back in the day, those were the peoples that were in the bars and the whorehouses. You knew them, they were loud, they were abusive, they weren't very functional, they weren't very contributing to society, they caused the wreck and the chaos. Well, guess what? We have that now, but we don't so called judge, we don't recognize that it has expanded. It's not just in the bars and the whorehouses. So back in the day, it was like a clearer line drawn in so many areas. If a person wanted to live like that, they wanted to give their mind to the devil, their soul to the devil, their spirit to the devil, their emotions to the devil, 24/7, 365, it was a known thing. And it was more known amongst the community that that's what it looks like when you give yourself over to dark spiritual forces, full will, full selfishness, full pleasure of the flesh, with no check on it. No discipline, no giving yourself to God, no surrendering yourself under the authority of God. It's like, okay, that's what that looks like. You're either the drunkard or you're up in the whorehouse. That's how those people live. That's their choice. And it hurts society really badly. And it was just known. Sometimes some of those things were glorified in Hollywood, but there you go. That's Hollywood, right? But nowadays, I'm not going to say everybody's drunkard, everybody's in the whorehouse and preach like that. But what I am going to say is that's what you have, but it's more subtle and it's more widespread. When people make the decision to live for pleasure and to live for self and to live for their wild, vain imaginations, idolatry, and giving themselves over to evil spirits that come along and tempt them away. And it can be a very private thing. You don't have to do a seance for it to happen. People give themselves over to evil spirit, drinking the alcohol or fornicating. That's the two like really most common ways in society, not to even mention the drugs. But giving themselves up to the lifestyle that's not submitted to God and is inviting the evil dark forces in and just letting everything go. That still is the drunkard and the whorehouses. It still is. But it's not seen as that. And you're not being open-minded if you judge it for what it is. So these days we have a problem of it's everywhere and everyone's doing it, but it's not very clear because it's not separated. People don't take those things outside of the home and go do them down at the bar because the homes are not Christian, the homes are not under God. And we've been away from that for so long we don't know what it really looks like or should feel like or be like. And so we have pipelines right into our home that's just pouring out filth 24/7 anyway in different ways. These same pipelines can be for good, but that's not what they're used for many times. Even in Christian homes, they're soft pouring constantly. And so without the clear separation, what you have is rampant drunkardness everywhere. Because I believe the narcissism is a form of drunkenness with the addictions and with the lack of reality, the loss of reality, and giving over unto darkness. Drunkenness is another good synonym that I've used many times for narcissism, just a form of being drunk. The devil's got their mind, the devil's got their spirit, whatever you want to call it. So now in these times what we have is a problem of what was once seen as unacceptable and seen for exactly what it was and kept away from civilization and decency is now all mixed in. So now instead of having the random drunkard who is completely dysfunctional and destructive to society, now you have that multiplied by 10 to 100 times and mixed in everywhere. Like some of these people do hold down a job because they're not that addicted to a substance. but they're just as dysfunctional in other ways. Like they'll hold down the job, but they will cause 5 other people at that workplace to lose their job over a period of time. And so it's like very dysfunctional. It's still very dysfunctional, but we don't see how it's pervasive, it's spreading. It's now mixed in with decency and civilization, but it's not decent and it's not civilized. Many times the people do, they finally get so bad that they are arrested. That does happen, and that does do a separation. But that's kind of like the only separation that we see anymore, is when the people become actually on the books legally criminal. But as far as the interpersonal that's not criminalized yet, what you have if you're abused by a narcissist in a narcissistic relationship, whether or not they paint themselves up as a church person or not, is you have someone being very dysfunctional in your house, very dysfunctional in your life. You have like the equivalent of someone who is a drunkard, a battering drunkard, complete with the rages, or it may come across as a silent treatment or even a gaslighting you. Because sometimes it's worse when they're super nice, but they just don't really, lots of things are passive. That can be death by 1,000 cuts too. But you're having these same concepts and principles everywhere in society and not divided, not quarantined. And that's a lot of what we face these days in our narcissistic relationships. And that gets into a concept of sometimes people are trying to be Christian and they're still this way. It's a lack of teaching, a lack of understanding of how it really should be and how we should be submitted to God, and saying no to flesh and saying no to our own, like to not holding up pleasure as a God. That's a form of idolatry. It's like we've lost so much of how things should be and remembering how it should be and having a community of people that knows how it should be enough, walking strongly in the right way to call these things what they are without being mocked. So you see more and more people become trapped in what I call a trap of Satan. And what this does, really, when I'm talking about this, guys, on this video, I'm going to be talking about emotional, mental torture traps, confusion, the blame game, the gaslighting. What this does is it stops your productivity, as you guys may be well aware. This stops your productivity, it stops your joy, it stops your growth. The attempt here, at least by the enemy, is to seriously stop your life in God. There is an attempt here to replace good, solid growth, peace, life, and love with years of being mired in the mud pits, being mired in confusion, pain, no way out. Of course, this can be used as seasons of like a wilderness and refinement, but that only goes so far, guys, because if you spend your entire life in a wilderness, I don't think that's like the purpose of God. That's not like God's purpose in your life is to spend 15, 25, 30 years in a wilderness. That's ridiculous. And it does get ridiculous how much you have to fight sometimes in this world spiritually to be productive and have things. That's like if you're not in regular fasting, things like that, you are. And of course, if you don't belong to Jesus, if you are not saved and seeking after His Holy Spirit to infill you and being in routine fasting, you're so much more vulnerable. And it's extremely hopeless if you're not even saved. As a Christian, it's like sometimes you really have to fight because the warfare, especially if you have any gifts, talents, and abilities and God's trying to use that, some of the people that you may meet, key people that you may meet, can try to take you down, even church people. So sure, it can be used for the refining fires, but after a while, there should be a lot of growth. There should be some moving forward. But if it seems like you're stuck in these kind of conditions for too long, I would say don't give up. It's a sign of the times, and we don't have much more time left on this earth. I don't believe we have that much more time, but it is a sign of the times. It's a warning to be in repentance. It's a warning to be with God and to be ready for eternity because of how short the times are, that they are this wicked and evil. And I also often encourage the Christians on this channel, especially if you're going through hardship and difficulty because of the times we're in, that is going to be a special reward for us. Especially when we're doing right, we're persecuted for doing right, completely innocent. We're trying to help. Before we knew the people were, evil, we were trying to help them and bless them and show them good things and be excited about God together. And so Whenever this sort of an attack on your life goes on for too long, when there's no or inadequate resolution, it becomes harmful, and that's the purpose of it. But God can fix and use everything. He will use everything for our good when we are belong to Him. The situations where there's really no way out, where it doesn't matter what way you turn, there's a mess. And I saw another channel on here, Luminous Star, was speaking about how she had noticed that mental illness comes in. We can become mentally ill or mentally challenged and start having symptoms of illness, real serious illness, whenever we're in a situation where there's extreme abuse and we're stuck having to try to figure it out and try to make sense of it. And probably what goes into all that is finding closure, because they leave you with no closure, having to detangle the gaslighting, which often comes with shame. Shame is a confusion that's placed on you that you do not deserve. When you're being lied to about your situation, you're being lied to about your motives, you're being lied to about why you made certain decisions that you had to make under duress, things like this. There's a complex of shame that can be put on you when groups of people attack you for things like this. And having to untangle all of these things for years, and even that can get into spiritual warfare and battles, that can lead to what would be diagnosable as mental illness. But for many years in the mental health profession, these double binds, specifically the double bind, which can become triple binds, quadruple binds, but specifically the double bind, was known to be the beginning of mental decline, mental issues, and causing disorders. Some examples of what I would call the torture traps are the catch-22, the double bind, the no way out, the bad outcome no matter what decision you make. Therefore, you're forced to be the bad guy. No matter what decision you make, you're forced to be the bad guy. You're forced to go against what you would have wanted to do as the best. What you would have chosen had you had the freedom, you would have chosen the best case scenario. That option is not made available to you. And yet, whenever things don't go well, with the handy help of the narcissist, things don't go well, guess who gets blamed? You do. You're the bad guy. The situations of doomed if you do, doomed if you don't. The situation of loving and needing the psychopath or the narcissistic person in your life. This can include things like being trapped financially by an abuser, but that's really a different issue than what I'm talking about. Being trapped financially, but you would get away if you could, is different than if you are held there by internal weaknesses, like you really don't want to live your life outside of the narcissist and what they provide for you. So financial trap is bad, but that's not this internal struggle that I'm addressing here. That's more like an outward prison. And another one that I commonly see that I'm going to throw into this video is that people are often trapped into life situations that they really don't want to be in, whether that's a bad marriage or a prolonged season of singlehood or many of the horrors that war can bring. You could say a crippling, a handicap, or a disability. But people are often put into positions that are not healthy and good for them and strong for them. It's not good. It's not natural. We face a lot of unnatural evils in this time with diseases and war and death. And that includes prolonged singlehood, in my opinion, because of the people that are aborted and the people who are taken captive by Satan at an early age so that they never are actually a marriageable person. They're just like a lifelong fornicator or a lifelong abuser in one way or another. And it's funny because I've been in single groups, because I've been single like my entire adult life, except I have been in relationships, but I've never been married. And I've went into single groups just to see kind of what people were saying and try to offer some help and advice, because I like doing that. And recently, it's so funny because I got kicked out of a single group. I wasn't kicked out. People were ganging up on me, so I left because I told too much truth. I was saying things like, I could have been married probably 5 times by now, easily, if I had wanted to in my adult life, but I did not think it would have been a very good marriage. I probably would have also been divorced about 5 times by now, because that's what you've got these days. It's not the best options. I was also saying things like, sometimes it's better to be single. Like sometimes we fantasize how wonderful the grass is on the other side when it's completely not. And I was pointing out that this is not healthy. I was pointing out things like nowadays marriage is extremely difficult and not what it should be, and therefore it's sometimes worse than being single. For example, what percentage of the time people were saying things like, I wish, like I'm in the hospital sick, I wished that my husband was here I wish I had a husband to come hold my hand while I'm sick at the hospital. And I was thinking, what they really should wish for is that anyone else in their life would care at that time and at least give them a phone call or a text. Because how many times do our husbands and significant others and wives would not be at the hospital when we're sick and would be wanting to be with someone else, or would literally physically be with someone else and lying to us that they had to work late while we're at the hospital sick? That's reality. I'm sorry. I don't think I'm being negative. That's reality. Therefore, I refuse to wallow and have a big pity party about how I'm single, when these married people these days have it 10 times harder. And so, anyway, I got kicked out of the group, or I left the group willingly after they ganged up on me, because I was just saying too much truth. I was tired of seeing people say, oh, if I were only married, I would have this and this and this and this. And I was trying to explain to these guys, are you really ready for that sacrifice? Are you really ready to not really have free time again, not have time to yourself again like it used to be? Are you really ready to lay down most of the things that you have fun doing to do something that somebody else wants, or for the kids that are coming? Which there's nothing wrong with sacrificing that to build a home, and, a home for God. But I was just laying out some truths, because a lot of times the single person thinks, they honestly believe that they're going to have life exactly everything in it that they like now, with just a few minor adjustments that they're okay with. They imagine these minor adjustments they're okay with, but by and large, they have life exactly how they want it, but they're just going to add the positives of marriage. And they don't understand it's a whole life rearrangement. And a lot of times, because of this sort of unrealistic attitude, they go into a marriage and it fails, because there was no adjustment on both sides, because everyone was expecting we're going to have things exactly the way we like it, exactly the way we decide, because we just think we're going to add a marriage to the things we like. And they're not realizing this level of sacrifice. If they could just live with the true level of sacrifice that it would take, a lot of the people that are single would be like, you know what? I'm just going to watch for the Lord coming, and I'm going to be happy every day, and I'm going to really enjoy the freedoms that I have, because wow, this is not, I was lied to about the extreme ideal romantic and the wedding cake, and all of this was some sort of a lie. So you guys can imagine why I left the group. But this is back to, some people get themselves into even imaginary torture traps of, oh, it's this way, and oh, it's that way. And the narcissist person plays on that to the max. They love these kind of lies in your mind. Like when they go to a new supply, that's why they triangulate all over social media, because they're playing on these kinds of lies. You're sitting there thinking, oh, they're just in blissful romance forever, and he hated me because I was everything that he said I was. And this is back to like a mental torture trap of not being in reality, not understanding the reality of it. If you could only see that 5 minutes before that social media post with both of them smiling, what kind of a argument that they had, and how they were on the brink of leaving, but he told her this lie that made her to where she felt bad about herself enough to feel guilty, to feel like she wasn't being supportive of him. And that's the only reason that she's smiling in that picture, is to kind of make up for, he lied to her that she wasn't fulfilling her role properly and something was wrong with her. Like, if you could just see all those dynamics, man, if we could see them, if we could see the lies clearly from the other side of what these guys were telling us, that would clarify immediately so much, right? So back to the catch-22 double bind, no way out. Condemned if you do, condemned if you don't. Guys, there's so many situations that this happens in families, at the workplace, in relationships. Many times it takes a lot of long-term serious prayer from many people for a miracle to change this, and that may be the only thing that changes it. Some things that help is keeping in mind that through this process you're going to learn a whole lot, and you're going to completely transform. You're going to completely become a whole different person, and how important it is to stay with God, but you're going to be completely changed. You're going to face the devil himself. I believe that you will be tremendously rewarded when it's over in different ways. A lot of times the Bible speaks of receiving double after a severe hardship. Also keep in mind that any abusers in the situation, they didn't win. No matter how bad it gets, they didn't win, because the truth is they failed at the point that they first bullied, that they first gaslighted, that they first lied, and that they first forced their power on you. That is where they lost. Pay attention to the signs that God is going to give you that their way doesn't prosper, they're miserable, and they're not going to a very good place. They failed from the beginning. Like I said, you will need special prayer for deliverance. You need to recruit special prayer for miracles. Never give up. Never give up. Giving up, giving in early, that is letting the evil win too much. One of the mind games here is it's never as hopeless as the situation and as the evil of the situation tries to tell you. It's never that hopeless. Seek, knock, and ask for the breakthrough. Cherish each victory. You can't imagine, sometimes when you're caught up in the lie of the situation, you can't imagine the goodness and the wealth and the prosperity and the health that you do have. No matter how beaten you are, you have so much more than that situation is trying to tell you that you do. While the abuser is more desperate and more impoverished than you can imagine. And I've said on these videos before, if you had to spend any time in their shoes, you would see it. It would be like, whoa, this is so demonic. And so you would feel like you're being choked. That's a lot of the reasons why they put on this big show and a big attempt even on their part to be just completely high and powerful and anything idealized, is because they're constantly reminded of the truth that because of their choices, they really have nothing. They don't have anything. They never have quiet, just peace and knowing that everything is okay. And that's a lot. That they are extremely desperate without that. Also keep in mind that you're going to use these opportunities for massive spiritual and personal growth. I believe you'll have that even when you're not really trying to work with it, but if you work with it, it can be amazing. And as much as you can untangle the lies and see the truth and not have the guilt complex that the situation puts on you, because these double binds where you can't do anything right, more than you realize, the people that are on the outside are taking your side. Even when they're quiet, people outside of you, people outside of the situation looking in are taking your side, because they're like, why did she do that to him? You know, why did so-and-so treat this person so bad? And I'm glad they left. I'm glad they moved on. I'm glad they took this situation or that situation. And often you're having to deal with such personal and legal and moral situations that people from the outside are glad that they're not having to deal with it. You're not being judged. If you were to be judged by a jury of peers, you're not being judged as though, ugh, why are they doing this? And ugh, why are they doing that? Why won't they just do this? The only time somebody steps in and bullies you and say, why won't you just do such and so, is when they're a bully, they're a control freak, they're inserting themselves where they don't belong, or you've made them look bad and they're trying to make you do an opposite action that will make you once more the scapegoat and make themselves be free. Something like that. Because the innocent outsider, bystander, would sit there and say, wow, I'm glad I'm not in a bind like that. They're having to make a tough choice. There's really no answer there. There's not a best answer. I know they're doing the best they can, and even people are even saying that they're grateful that you made the choices that you did, because those were really the best choices for everyone after all. A lot of times when we get caught in these really tough, hard dilemmas, we made the best choice at the end of the day. When we were careful and prayerful, and when we take the pain that we take to make the right choices, it'll work out okay, and it'll definitely work out way better than if the narcissists were making these choices.